Let's extend a warm welcome to Mr. GG Alcock.
Thank you. So as Alec said, I grew up in a mud hut in a Zulu village in a place called Msinga in KwaZulu-Natal. Often people used to say to me, where's Msinga? And I used to struggle to explain exactly where it is. Now I just say it's right next to Nkandla. So you get an idea. So I moved to Msinga. They called from Msinga to Gauteng or Johannesburg, and they call it Kwandonga Ziyaduma, which means a place where the walls thunder. And I moved there basically with a backpack and very few material possessions. We grew up incredibly poor in a mud hut in the Zulu village. We washed in the Tugela River, so we had lots of running water. My mother's in her 80s and still lives in the mud hut and refuses to change her life. But I was a capitalist, and deep down I realized that there was no glory in poverty. And so I moved to Kwandonga Ziyaduma, and kind of the only real friends I had were kind of IFP warriors or ANC comrades, because I was a political activist, but at the same time had kind of grown up among these Zulu IFP kind of supporting people. And when I moved to Kwandonga Ziyaduma, I kind of didn't even know what the concept of entrepreneurship was. And I realized that the only value I had was really access to certain places that were invisible, that were inaccessible to people. And these were the townships and the rural areas of South Africa. And in that access, there was a huge richness. And part of what I've spent my life doing is not only running a very successful business. I ran one of the first marketing businesses that focused on the townships, not the one that Mr. Mashaba was talking about, luckily. And it was called Minanawe Marketing, and we were the first people to really do marketing into the townships. But I realized that there was this huge economy in these places, and the problem is that we are perpetually surrounded by, we're doomsday scrolling through the media, and we're surrounded by terms like we're the most unequal place on the planet. We have surrounded by poverty. We have pictures in Time magazine of like rows and rows of shacks right next to fancy houses. We fly into Cape Town International over shacks. And so we're surrounded by these things, and we believe that to a large extent they are true for the majority of people. Things like poverty, inequality, informality, and so on and so forth. But they're not true to the majority of people. And recently I saw a great headline in the Daily Maverick, and I have really high blood pressure when I read those kind of things, because the headline I read said, cash crunch consumers turn to alcohol and clothing. And the story was that ShopRite's alcohol, off-premise alcohol business had grown by 17% in the last financial year, and Pick n Pay's clothing business had grown by like 12%. And yet they couldn't wrap their head around the fact that maybe there was an economy out there that meant that people actually had money and they were able to afford alcohol. But they had to bring in cash crunch consumers, so people with no money going to buy Johnny Walker Blue and Nikes. And we have these kind of narratives. So, we read a story about a gogo who lives in a shack in abject poverty on the breadline. She can't afford to feed her children. She's got 8 children that she's feeding. And the story is 100% true. But we extrapolate it to believe that it is representative of the total population. And there's an amazing book called Factfulness, which talks about anecdotal and media bias, which is about how we take a story we read in the media or a story that we are told by a maid, an Uber driver, or someone else, and we extrapolate that to say that it's true for the majority. So just shout out some numbers. What would you guys say is the typical, what is the average or the percentage of households that live in informal dwellings in South Africa, in shacks? Percentage of households in informal dwellings. 70, 80? Cool. What would you say is the typical household size in South Africa? How many people in a household? 6? Any higher? Any lower? 8? Cool. So I'll tell you why that is important. 12% of households in South Africa live in informal dwellings. 86% plus of households in South Africa live in formal dwellings. And so why is that important? It is important because if you actually go to the average township, whether it's Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, Soshanguve, Mdantsane, wherever you may go, there has been an extraordinary transformation of housing, where people have gone from a four-room house to a double story, or they've extended their back room. And if you go into the average township today, you will find that most houses are these really impressive formal houses. And even if you went to a place like Orange Farm, which is a shack settlement in the Vaal, you will find that 10 years ago, there were rows and rows of shacks. You drive through that same place today, and all you see is double-story houses and beautiful houses. And there's been an incredible transformation of housing and formality of housing that has happened. And none of it has happened with any form of formal home loans or credit of any formal nature. It's lay-by, it's what I call brick-by-brick home loans, and primarily actually by what people call Ama Society or Stokvels savings. And this is quite an important thing in terms of if we see the kind of investment that has happened into that kind of stuff. And if you go into a township and you go into township homes, one of the things that people spend most on are things like ceilings. You go into houses on these like elaborate ceilings. And I did a talk a while ago to a listed company called KAP, and one of their businesses, PG Bison. And PG Bison does decorative wood furnishings for kitchens and cupboards and so on and so forth. And which is the business that does incredibly well there? Is PG Bison. And who is their primary business? And they said to me when I did this thing, they're like, we're growing like crazily. I think 20 or 30%. Our primary market is township markets, and we kind of never knew why this all of this was going there, where the incomes were going. And if we look at so I took a group from ShopRite into Soweto a while ago, and I said to them as we were driving around and showing them these amazing houses, I said, the biggest trend in the townships today is stainless steel or chrome gutters. Now, chrome gutters have no function, I'm sure you'll agree, but if you drive around a township, you won't believe how many there are. So we walked into this house, and as we walked into the house, they saw these chrome gutters, and they're like, wow, those are beautiful. And then the lady stopped, it had to be a lady, and she said, look at the imprint. There was the total chrome gutter had this imprint on it all the way around, and it was Louis Vuitton. And the house had these Louis Vuitton gutters, and I would have shown the picture of it. We walked in and we sat down, we chatted to the lady in the house, and we said, well, what do you do? She said, I'm unemployed. But she had Louis Vuitton gutters. So we should be celebrating this kind of transformation of the space, because there has been this incredible transformation where the vast proportion of people are living in formal houses. But there's another important thing. In fact, just to go back to the formality. So 12% of households, according to South African General Household Survey, which is an extraordinary survey, it's not GG's figures, live in informal dwellings. And the recent figures came out saying 12% of households live on the breadline. Now, there's a very remarkable correlation there. But the point is, and I'm not saying that there aren't people living in shacks. I'm not saying that it's acceptable for 12% of people to be living in shacks, not at all. But the point is that more than 80% of people are not living in shacks. And are we talking about those people and the remarkable transformation they've made in their built environments? We aren't. And the spend that they've generated by buying the chrome gutters or ceilings or PG Bison's boards going into that space. The other important thing is you all said, 8 people per household, 6 people per household. Average household in South Africa is 3 people, 3.3 people. In fact, 23% of households in South Africa today are one-person households. A quarter of households are one-person households. 18% of households are 2-people households. And about 17% are 3-people households. So what is happening is people are moving out of the communal home and they're moving into their own households, creating a massive sector of what people call backrooms or amaroom rentals. Why is that important? It's important because smaller households have more disposable income and they spend more money on themselves. And so when we start thinking about these massive households, everyone's trying to spread this money around. When you've got a 1 or 2 or 3 person household, it's a dramatic difference. And if you look at Scandinavia and Sweden about 30 years ago, there's a small company called IKEA who built a massive business of flat pack furniture for 1 person households living in small formal dwellings. There's no difference in our demographic today from Sweden 30 years ago. We have a large number of people living in formal, small spaces and small households. And so what do small households do? 1 person, 2 person households, they spend more on things like electronics. They spend more on things like personal care, and they spend it on less on things like staples. Now, I had a session with a executive of one of the biggest retailers in South Africa a while ago, and this executive said to me, we can see the impact of the economy on people's spending patterns because people are buying smaller and smaller pack sizes of staples, rice, flour, sugar, and so on and so forth. They're going from like 10 and 12.5 kgs down to 5 kgs. Clearly, people are struggling economically, and so they are having to buy a small pack and make it last across this large 6 or 8 person family. So I asked the person, I said, is it because of the economy, or is it because that smaller households don't require large pack sizes? And the person didn't know this number about how many households were 1 or 2 person households. Now imagine you're shaping your decisions around your business, your billion rands business, because of what the headline is in Daily Maverick, or that anecdotal bias of that story you read, which you then translates into saying everyone is living in these large households and everyone is struggling. And again, I'm not saying that people aren't struggling. What I'm saying is that we must be understanding that the majority is not struggling. And people are to a large extent under budget pressure, not income pressure. My wife complains about the price of rotisserie chicken at Woolworths because it's gone up. That is budget pressure. There's not income pressure. And I'll talk just now to a large amount of the income that's out there. Even the UCT Liberty Institute do some remarkable research. They pointed out that there were 3.4 million black middle class individuals in South Africa, 1 million more than white middle class. And their report was titled Thriving versus Striving. If they'd written the same report about the white middle class, it would have been called Striving, not Thriving. This is about thriving, not striving. So we actually have a very large young population who are in small households informally and actually doing relatively well. And there's a lot more incomes out there than we realize, despite the unemployment figures, which are absolute rubbish. So one of the first big sectors, there's 20 billion rand a year earned by South African households in backroom rental. 20 billion rand a year conservatively is probably almost double that. Why is backroom rental so big? 1 person households. What is the most stolen product in South Africa's ports, according to the insurance industry? Must be food. I mean, everyone's starving. Not generators. Hair extensions. 64% growth in hair extension imports into South Africa. And according to the insurance industry, the most stolen product in South Africa's ports, hair extensions. Whereas small households spend more on themselves. There's a massive sector of beauty and personal care. Mr. Mashaba knows it very well. And there's 10 billion rand a year earned by salons in hair extensions and so on. We have 25 billion rand a year is earned by South African households for spaza rental. The spaza sector is a 160 billion rand a year sector across about 100,000 spaza shops. 70% of those spaza shops are Somalis, Ethiopians, Bangladeshis, and Pakistanis. They don't own the properties, so they rent them from South Africans. And no one talks about that. So with 45 to 50 billion rand conservatively is earned by South Africans in passive income. We have other sectors too. We have 50 billion rand in fast food across about 45,000 outlets. We have 110 billion rand earned by 45,000 licensed taverns and shebeens. And we have 50 billion rand a year in the taxi industry that we love and admire, and yesterday was causing trouble. 50 billion rand a year just in the taxi sector. And so what is the first business that township youth start, unemployed township youth start? And every street corner has one. Car washes. You know, I hate having black people in the audience. They get the answers. Car washes. What is that indicator of? Car washes. There are 10 million unfinanced, generally uninsured cars on our roads. I think it's about 40%. At the time I wrote Gastronomic Revolution, it was about 40% of the cars on our road. We now have traffic jams in townships. The fact that youth start car washes tells you the nature of the vehicles on the roads. They're not bakkies that people are using to transport. You don't have car washes in Lagos. And in fact, I saw a recent article that said most of the Uber drivers are servicing their cars in what I call the Gasi mechanics sector. And the Gasi mechanics and panel beaters is about 80,000 of these highly efficient businesses servicing the taxi industry and this informal, unfinanced car sector. Over and above that, there's many, many others. I won't even go into it, but there's 44 billion rand in Stokvel savings. My brother works in an extraordinary rural development project in KZN with goats. We have about 7 million goats owned by rural households, and they sell 2 million of those a year at an average cost of about 1,500 rand. So 3 billion rand is earned by rural households, primarily women households in these areas. If you go to downtown here, Top Deck Taxi Rank in Cape Town, or any of the kind of main taxi ranks, you'll find these posters on the walls, and the posters say, "Find lost lover," penis enlargement. You can see I've been looking at them. And then they say, "Credit, blacklist not important." And it says, "Bring 3 months bank statements and 3 months pay slips." Because in South Africa, if you do not have a pay slip, you do not exist. We have created a society where we believe a job is a pay slip. And if you don't exist if you don't have that and cannot produce that. And yet there's this massive other sector out there. And in fact, I was chatting to a gogo a while ago who sells 3,000 vetkoek every single day for 1 rand each, and about 500 rands worth of tea and coffee and cheese slices and polony and so on. She turns over 3,500 rand a day, and she she makes a profit of about 1,500 rand on that. She's building a 2-story house in Meadowlands in Soweto cash from selling amagwinya. And I said to her, "Do you have a job?" She says, "Yeah, sebenza nginamsebenzi," which is a play on words. I work, but I do not have work. Because in fact, she sees herself as a worker and not as employed. And these are the kind of things that we need to understand. And who supports these? We've actually created a society that's focused on the pay slip earning people, but we ignore the rise of hustle. There's this incredible growth of entrepreneurship, of independent business people out in the space. Who supports them? Who helps them grow? Can they lend money? They can't. I was interviewed with Alec and I did an interview with a young lady called Dabi Singh. Dabi Singh rents out back rooms in Soweto. She works for the city council, and she's got a bunch of back rooms, and she earns 148,000 Rand a month from renting out these back rooms. And it goes into her bank account. And she went to her bank because she's now bought another property cash and she wants to build there. And she went to her bank and she asked them if she could borrow 1.5 million Rand to start building. And it took about 2 weeks for them to come back to her, and they turned her down and they said, you don't qualify. So she decided to apply for a 1.5 million Rand or 1.3 million Rand Mercedes, and they approved the finance in 20 minutes. So we should actually be celebrating the majority. We should be celebrating people in this space. And we should be celebrating this revolution is not happening in soup kitchens. It's actually happening among entrepreneurs, gasipreneurs, and we should be looking at how are we enabling and how are we supporting those kind of spaces. And we should be asking the businesses that you invest in, are they involved in this space? Because this is the future of economic activity in the continent, but even especially in South Africa. And whether it's a business like a Capitec or like Shoprite has just invested in a wholesale business, Shoprite Cash and Carry, recognizing the size of the spaza sector. If you can't beat them, at least supply them. And all of these companies, are you looking at them? Are we exploring businesses? Because the rest of business is flatlining. This is where the opportunities are. And we should be looking at the businesses that we invest in, that we're managing, and so on, and saying, are they invested in these environments? And if they're not invested in those environments, should they be? And if they don't have a strategy for this sector, you are going to be left behind. And so I really believe that this is not only the opportunity, this is where this massive sector is. And I just want to read in ending. I'm on time, Alec. So I wrote in my book, The Ride into That Valley of Red Rocks and Heat, Poverty, Love and Violence, that valley where I was bred Zulu, that valley led me to other worlds, invisible, hidden, alongside most of our former world. And that informal world I entered, like my valley in Msinga, is inhabited by tribes of survivors, gasipreneurs, of tabletop traders, hawkers, hustlers, gasikos restaurateurs, spazaret superstores, and backroom rental barons. Go among them, give them respect, for they are the future. Thank you.